Philadelphia Phillies general manager Dave Dombrowski is known for taking big swings in the trade market and being one of the most forward-facing general managers in baseball. While he surely made his fair share of big splashes with this Phillies team, he does seem to be holding things close to the vest at this trade deadline. In this video, I want to discuss why that is, talk a little bit about the prospects that seem to be guarded so heavily by Dombrowski at this point in time, and a little bit about the mindset from here. I specifically want to touch on Andrew Painter specifically in the most depth, as well as a couple other guys that I do think are worth noting in this. Now, before I dive fully into it, I do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button. That at this point in time, 96.2% of you guys tuning in the video have not subscribed to the channel just yet. We got to keep that Phillies Digest family growing. We got plenty to break down as we head into the meat of the season and the playoff run coming, and want each and every one of you along for the ride here. Now, to talk a little bit about what I specifically want to get into today, it does seem like Dave Dombrowski, for all his reputation as this big swinger, this guy who's willing to sacrifice prospects, that really has not played itself out since he's come to Philadelphia. Each trade deadline that we've been a part of, it feels like he's been pretty satisfied making those smaller moves around the margins than a true needle mover. Now, granted, once again, with this Phillies team, there is no doubt that the big dogs are going to be what carries this team home. That it's going to come down to the bat of Bryce Harper, the Kyle Schwarbers, the Nick Castellanos, the Trey Turners, that those are the guys that are already in place. So it's not like you do need to take that type of big swing, but it has been a little bit surprising to me kind of how guarded he's been in a lot of negotiations. Now, to touch a little bit on the prospects, and I want to start with this report that we got talking about what kind of the mindset is, and to read it off, Matt Feinstand of MLB.com believes that Justin Crawford could be the one moved, writing that Andrew Painter and Aiden Miller are, quote, close to untouchable. Quote, top prospects Andrew Painter and Aiden Miller are close to untouchable, and while Crawford, the Phillies' number 3 prospect, is also highly regarded within the system, it's possible he could be moved in the right deal. Quote, the Phils are in the market for an outfielder and bullpen help, so if the right controllable piece comes along, the 20-year-old Crawford could be a part of the package. And I will note here that that quote specifically did come out before the 2 trades that were done, but this article was just written today with kind of that as evidence, so I did want to note that there. And to dive a little bit into the prospect rankings for this Phillies team, we can see Andrew Painter, number 1, I believe he's ranked number 27 in all of MLB baseball there. Aiden Miller sitting there at number 2, Justin Crawford at 3, Starl Caba at 4, Mick Abel at 5, who we've heard plenty about as well. Devin Saltbane there, Brian Rincon, Eduardo Tate, Gabriel Rincones Jr., and Griff McGarry, who's another guy who we've heard plenty about all the way down at the 10th spot. Now, in general, I think we get into a little bit of a philosophical conversation when it comes to prospects. There's no doubt that you always want your prospect in your minor leagues as strong as possible. But I do think that you do have to approach a crossroads where you're having this conversation for how much do you value a guy now versus a guy that is a little more well-known and you have a better feel for what he's going to be at the MLB level. I think baseball, more so than any other sport, is more of a crapshoot for how prospects can develop. And for every success story that you do see a guy come out as a top prospect, there's plenty more that do not work out. And the guys that stick in mind are like a Dominic Brown with this Phillies team. Even a guy like Christian Pache, who the Phillies just traded in that deal to bring in Austin Hayes there, that we saw that he was a guy who was highly regarded as a prospect. He's now on his 4th MLB team in the span of a very short period of time because he has not lived up to those expectations. Now, the biggest guy that I did want to talk about here is Andrew Painter. And I did want to dive into the latest update that we had from Dave Dombrowski. This was just a couple months ago that he was speaking on 94 WIP. And Dombrowski was asked specifically about his rehab, which he's going through the Tommy John surgery. And for what it's worth, I think that's much more than a brush over. That I think it's a very serious issue for young pitchers to have to deal with. And while we've seen some incredible advances with what the recovery period has looked like and many more success stories than used to be the case, it's still not a great sign for a guy who has not had any level of major league success or really opportunity yet to be having those type of issues. Now, what Dombrowski said was, quote, Painter's rehab is going fine. He's just tossing at this point, which is where he should be. I don't really look for Andrew to pitch this year. I'm looking towards 2025. I guess you can always be surprised, but I don't want to put that pressure on him. The host and Dombrowski also discussed a possible Zack Wheeler extension, Bryce Harper's contract status, and much more. And it continues on that, as for Painter, the injury is a brutal development for him. He was potentially going to make this roster out of spring training in 2023, but ended up trying to rehab the elbow, which ultimately didn't work. He enters 2024 as the number 1 prospect in the organization and the number 27 prospect in all of baseball. The following comes from a portion of MLB.com prospect profile, which writes, quote, the fact that Painter is still regarded as one of the best pitching prospects in the game while on the sidelines is a testament to his ability. His combination of stuff, size, and feel for pitching add to the faith in him with a legitimate 4-pitch mix at his disposal. His fastball can touch triple digits and was averaging around 98 miles per hour at the end of 2022, and he throws both a sinking two-seamer as well as a high-spin four-seamer up in the zone. His slider is an out pitch, a low 80s offering with a ton of break and huge spin rates. His upper 70s curve provides a different look, and his above-average changeup has really improved. So obviously there's a glowing report about him as a prospect, and there is good reason for that to be the case. But I do kind of circle back to this conversation and by the way, we can have a completely separate conversation about the management of that elbow and how he kind of tried to rehab, it ultimately wasn't good enough, and got surgery probably later than should have been the case. That certainly was a frustrating factor for me, but the bottom line is the results are the results, and we can't have any revisionist history there. With Painter specifically, I do understand that this is a guy that likely has a strong career ahead of him. But I just struggle when you kind of have these conversations to hold on to the hope of this guy making a full recovery and looking like himself pre-Tommy John, which is far from a guarantee, when you could go out there and get a true, real deal impact player that could impact this specific World Series run. And when talking about this Phillies team, I know we're down in the dumps right now. That there's no doubt that this has been a team that is playing their worst baseball of the season. But for what it's worth, they've lost 4 straight series at Oakland, at Pittsburgh, Minnesota, and Cleveland, and they've increased their lead in the NL East by a game over those 16 days. Now, this is not to say that just because the Braves are playing bad, that the Phillies are playing good. Those are very different conversations there. But the point being that they are in the driver's seat to truly contend for a World Series, and I do believe they have a true chance, as good as ever. As good as I feel even better about this season than it was the past 2 years. And in comparison to the past 2 years, there were frustrations in the way they came out of the gate, that they did stumble, they did not play their best baseball from the start. That was far from the case this year. They looked like a dominant team from opening day. And to see that be the case gives them a little bit of wiggle room to have these type of struggles. And I've also circled back to this point a lot. As much as I believe what Dombrowski's saying, and once again, he is one of the more forward-facing front office members in all of sports, and especially baseball, it's also smokescreen season. That you want to say things to have teams believe it, even if that is not necessarily the case. And for what it's worth, there is quite the history for today on July 29th for being an impactful day. And what that is, and shout out to Tim Kelly for the tweet here, that the Phillies have made 4 major trades in recent history on July 29th. 2002, acquired Placido Polanco from the Cardinals. In 2008, acquired Cliff Lee. In 2010, acquired Roy Oswalt. And in 2011, acquired Hunter Pence. So all very impact guys that played a role in the playoffs in each one of these situations there. That is a trend that I would love to see continue with this Phillies team. So as much as I respect being guarded, I understand the importance of wanting to keep as many of these prospects as possible and wanting to extend the era of Phillies baseball. I still think this core has enough years left that it is worth the risk. Guys like Alec Bohm, Bryson Stott, they have plenty of years left in the tank. Even some of the younger guys that you do hope to develop. The guys like Johan Rojas, who is 23 years old and you're hoping can get better. A guy like Brandon Marsh, who's 26 and has plenty of good years ahead of him and looks to be growing in the right direction. That I won't be satisfied if the additions are just Austin Hayes and really who I believe will be the prize of this overall trade line, which is Carlos Estevez here. That is the biggest impact or needle mover that I can see. If he can establish himself as the true closer for this team, this is absolutely a win. And I don't want to be Mr. Skepticism here, but it is a little concerning to me that really the cutter is the only standout pitch for him. Yes, he has 20 saves this year, but it's also kind of strange to me for him to have a career year at age 31. I'm hoping that it was legit. I don't want to be skeptical, and until I get to see him pitch up close and personal in a Phillies uniform, I'm not going to form my opinion too strongly there, but I'm just not ready to lock in that is absolutely the answer in a way that I think it's being talked about by Dave Dombrowski, rightfully so, that you should be painting it that way, as that is the case. But the bottom line is we will see if it's good enough in October, and I think this Phillies team should be doing everything possible to give themselves a chance. So while I do understand the concept of wanting to keep these prospects, I understand labeling guys as untouchable because you do believe in them in the long run. There's plenty of evidence from what we've seen in their early on minor league baseball careers for that to be the case. I just struggle to leave any stone unturned as far as going all in for this Phillies team. So I do think that's the conversation behind the scenes right now. As it is, how much can these players improve this Phillies team versus how much are we risking for the future? And it is very clear for all these trades and the results that are popping out that it is not a buyer's market, that it is a steep price for each of these impact players, and really the Phillies have been in the mix. Even people, I don't believe this is the case, but I've seen plenty of criticism for them overselling or giving up too much to add a guy like Carlos Estevez here. Now, granted, when push comes to shove, we will see if this team is good enough. Once again, it will come down to the backs of Bryce Harper, the pitchers that we already have in the Zack Wheeler, the Aaron Nola, the Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, Trey Turner. We know who the core of this team is. I do think they're going to be ready for battle when push comes to shove, but it would make me feel way better and way more optimistic if they could add just one more piece, one more high-end reliever, one more outfielder, something like that. Give me something to buy in and believe. Dave Dombrowski, ball is in your court. The countdown to the MLB trade deadline is under 24 hours at this point in time. So let me know who you guys think. Drop your dream trade target at this point in time with under a day to go in the comments. Let me know anything else that you got on your mind. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button and dropping a like once again. And I'll be talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.